So a real pleasure now to introduce Pippa Heylings, who Therese has already half introduced, MP, Liberal Democrat MP for South Cambridgeshire, Lib Dem spokesperson for climate change and net zero, but I think more than that, just a fantastic champion of the agenda for many years, instrumental in setting up the Liberal Democrats for nature and climate. Also, I'm told, instrumental, I read your speech recently in Parliament, instrumental in setting up the Galapagos Islands Marine Reserve and lots else. So Pippa's been doing this for a long time. Really keen to hear what you have to say, Pippa. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. And it's such a pleasure to be here and in the loos and just coming in with so many familiar faces, which is absolutely wonderful. So not a hostile crowd, I understand. But I want to say a huge thanks to Stephen Green Alliance for convening all of us and for inviting me to speak what I think is a really critical time. And as we know, every day got record heat waves, wildfires, storms hitting communities and livelihoods and nature, with 1 in 6 species at risk of extinction. How can we be saying, this? And given that we are in the Royal College of Medicine, it's important to note that last week, the amazing Lancet countdown on health and climate change said that we don't count the impact of climate change only in carbon emissions, and those impacts, but also we count it now in the number of lives lost, with this appalling statistic that 1 person dying every minute from extreme heat across the world. They lay out absolutely explicitly and clearly the links between climate change and public health. So believe them and their 123 scientists across the globe, not Bill Gates. So I care, we all do. And as a good and wise friend from the Ecuadorian Amazon told me, it's all right to have vested interests. And so I declare my vested interests. I am interested in the rules, the licensing, the lawmaking, because I have a stake in every single decision and action made, because it will affect me, my children, my communities, and my friends' futures around the world. We all have stakes, and we are stakeholders and shareholders in the social, political, economic, and natural capital which is needed for a fairer and greener future. And as stakeholders, we've got to make sure we empower that voice. And as shareholders, whether that's from our allotments, our green spaces, our waterways, to the boardrooms, we have rights. And we need to be heard. And we've got to look, therefore, at that personal, dig deep inside all of us to maintain that motivation. And for me, I do want to start with the personal. I grew up in Hull. It was a whaling port originally. And my dad was a GP, and very, very young, he took me along with him on his home visits to the homes in an area of deprivation at that time, where we saw the dockers after the closure of the pits. We saw the fisher and trawling families after the collapse of the North Sea fisheries, a failure in sustainable extraction and management of a resource, and a failure in the transition away from a dying fossil fuel source, which was coal. Sound familiar, but this was a long time ago. Nothing for those communities, nothing. And I saw alcoholism, depression, broken families. We can't let that happen. And later, in East Africa, I saw firsthand what it was like when I saw communities even more closely and desperately connected to the natural resources that they depended on. And that's where I got very much involved in forest and community management of both forest and marine management of their resources. And this was about health, it was about nutrition on the table, it was about poverty alleviation. And yes, and that led to finally creating marine protected areas for multiple use in the Indian Ocean, in Zanzibar, but also years helping to create, with my husband who's also here, the Galapagos Marine Reserve. He was the director of the Charles Darwin Research Station, so that's my sort of chief scientist. As a conservationist, he creates the conflicts. I became a conflict management expert, so I dealt with the conflicts. So we kept each other in business, actually. You know, and I saw firsthand the ravages of climate change because I then got involved from 2009 and 2010 when we saw COP10. We have lived this despair before. We saw the collapse of trust, legitimacy at Copenhagen when we thought, this has now gone. Other vested interests have managed to collapse the negotiations. Where do we turn next? Well, where we turned next was closer collaboration, closer cooperation, more consensus, and building up the COP process to then get to where I was at the Lima COP, which then led to the Paris Agreement. So I also saw from the largest climate policy program from the UK, which I was lucky enough to be leading on in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, the ravages to local economies of climate change. Harvests, livelihoods, coastal infrastructure, everything already being harmed. But I learned. And who was it here who said, what is the differences between climate, nature, and environment? I learned from those cultures and countries where they've never seen a difference. These are inextricably linked. Across South American countries, in the Amazon, these are inextricably linked. And in fact, they fought Western influences and scientists who constantly tried to put them into these silos. So we learned from them about how you can adapt to thrive. And we've been fighting ever since, and they have, to make sure that adaptation are part of nationally determined contributions, because the West didn't want to see them in there because that might have implications economically. So we have to work out what our framings are, absolutely. And we worked with emerging economies like Peru and Colombia, how to decouple growth from carbon emissions. And why was that important? Because I saw what happens when we have a consensus, when our achievements. So I was in countries that looked at the UK and said, wow, the first ever Climate Change Act. Where we lead, others follow. 60 countries followed. Wow, the Independent Climate Change Committee. 40 countries followed. The NDCs, others followed. So I saw that happening with my own eyes in these countries and in these emerging economies. We saw it with Ed Davey and the coalition, the transformation of the energy market with contracts for difference. We saw how that can happen, and it brought energy costs down at that time. We also saw the Environment Act and how that did bring environment high up into the planning agenda, into farming and others. We've just got to keep it going there. But we know that that consensus which has brought so much is fracturing, is difficult, and the headlines are bleak for so many of us. And in Britain, it is, many on the right are treating climate action as the next trench in its culture war. And I've been together with Nigel Farage when he said, not just climate action, renewables are the next Brexit. This is what it is. This is the divisive, this is the war. And Reform UK have taken aim at businesses seeking to invest in domestic renewables. They've pledged to reintroduce fracking across our British countryside. They've actually said, yes, we'll send people back down the pit. And they're locally scrapping local environment flooding schemes in their newly won councils. And these attacks aren't just about climate policy. These are attacks funded by other vested interests. It's a populist assault on evidence, expertise, and the long-term thinking that we've seen before that led to acts of national self-harm, and I'm a Liberal Democrat, so I can say it, which was Brexit. Now, we won't rebuild this climate consensus that we had by going quiet at this time, and I think there's been a sort of discombobulated time where whilst those who are climate action deniers have got their heads in the sand, saying that fossil fuels are the future and will bring costs down. We've also been putting our heads in the sand, I think, perhaps because of concerns about electoral damage or about the divisiveness of this debate. But we are right, and facts don't lie. There is scientific consensus on what is the problem and what we need to do. And the majority of the public agree to, as we've seen, and you've heard from the public polling today, the majority of people want to see more action on climate and nature, not less. So, and I hear Therese Coffey and Conservatives, and I want them to come back to the consensus. So I say, we could look at perhaps ways and means, but we do not change the infrastructure, and that is the Climate Change Act. And we do not change the vision on what the science tells us in terms of the 2050 target. We have to build on what is the art of the possible. And the Liberal Democrats are ready to do this boldly and very loudly and alongside all of you. No, we're not going to be quiet. And the environment, the media might not know this so much, and I don't know many of you in the room as well, but it's always been at the heart of what is to be the Liberal Democrats and the Liberal Democrat Party. Our green values, our responsibility for the planet and safeguarding the balance between nature and all life forms for future generations is in the opening lines of our Constitution, right from the very beginning. And we've got good news. So you've heard now about the launch of Liberals and Democrats for Nature and Climate, which is the same as the Conservatives Environment Network, Labour's LSEF, Labour for Climate and Environment Forum. These are all ways of just saying, how do you help support lawmakers, both in the Commons and in the Lords, to actually have a stronger voice, build on all of those policies together. So I invite you, please, we've got here together with us Elliot Chapman-Jones, who's joined us to be the Director of Lib Dems for Nature and Climate. Work with him, work together. Let's build that consensus together, work with us, empower 72 Lib Dem MPs, the largest third party in a century. And we've been flexing our muscle. And one of the great things, because coming from sort of a conflict transformation expertise, it's about that cross-party consensus. And so this, I'm very, very proud. And if Olivia Blake had been here today, she probably would have talked about it. So last week, we launched a new model of cross-party working. This is called the Climate and Nature Crisis Caucus. And it's just been launched in Parliament. You'll be hearing a lot more about it. Get involved with us. Help us, because we are strategically looking at how we work together across all of those parties. We haven't got Reform in there, I wonder why. But we have got all of the other parties and independents involved there. And we are going to be making a noise together and supporting each other. And also, I'll be attending COP30 in Berlin with a cross-party group of delegates of MPs together, supported by DESNES and by the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, to enable us to go together, work together, get those bonds, and know what we should be working on together. But we know we've got to take people with us. And at conference, we launched our new nature and climate policy, and it's called Our People, Our Planet, and it focuses on putting people front and centre of the transition. So first of all, we want to let people know the good news, shouting it from the rooftops, that the net zero economy, the green economy, is growing 3 times as fast as any other sector in the UK right now. And there are 1 million livelihoods reliant on it already. And globally, it's only second in terms of growth to tech. The potential for offshore would mean we would need 35 new manufacturing centres, and we need to regenerate the ports around our country, which are some of those poorest areas. And let's go back to Hull. Hull now has Siemens with the wind turbine manufacturing centre right there by Alexandra Docks. And on the night of New Year's Eve, a Reform voting area, Brexit voting area, carried the wind turbine to replace what had been the whaling bone, that gleaming ivory wind turbine blade, into the centre of the city square, because that's jobs, that's the future. 1,000 new jobs, apprenticeships, and halving of the job seeker allowance in a regenerated port area. But we know that this transition has got to be equitable and fair across the board, and energy bills are high, and they're higher on households, and they are for businesses too. In fact, so families are facing more than £50 a month more than they were before, despite all of these, the cost of energy coming down. So homegrown renewable energy, wind and solar, is the cheapest form of generation, but neither homes, households, or businesses feel that in their pocket. And that's why in July this year, Liberal Democrats set out to break the link, decoupling between gas prices and electricity costs. We're also looking at how we can halve those energy bills, because we're also looking at reforming that electricity market further after what Ed Davey did way back. And stop treating our electricity bills as checkbooks where you can just charge everything to it. And let's really look about what our electricity bills should actually be reflecting and paying for. So you'll be hearing more from us, and we invite you to come and work with us on this. And, of course, being a Liberal Democrat, what nobody's really talking loudly enough about as one of the solutions in this area is how our environmental consensus has also got to be with our European neighbours. So we are working on what the EU-UK reset should be in terms of energy cooperation. Because then, my vision is a North Sea which is a pooled green energy source. And we'll be looking at having, and they've already said we can, participation in the EU's internal electricity market so we can export all that amazing green energy that we are creating. And it will cut costs and bring down our energy bills too. What could be better than just sort of fascinating to do all of this stuff too, while celebrating the fact that some of our greatest nature achievements were because of EU environmental legislation like the Habitats and Water Directive. So we could get back to some of that rather than some of this divergence. But it's not just about energy. It's about our rights to clean air, to clean water, to sustainable public transport, to greener communities. And we need to get much tougher on those who should be paying for this. And that was another part of our being part of the EU, the polluter pays principle, which has still not properly been absorbed into our legislation because we don't have principles in legislation. We have to make sure it comes into every single piece of legislation itself. And so we've got to make sure that those polluter pays for that. And then touch the pulse of what really matters to people, as we've heard from this about nature. Really tapping into those blue and green veins that we saw with people's outrage around sewage in water. It's also about the way nature is important to everybody. And yes, we're all for consensus, and consensus can help us tell the government in a robust way, actually, we're getting it wrong on the planning and infrastructure bill at the moment, part 3. Because every time the Treasury really takes a swipe at nature being the barrier, at nature being needs to be bulldozed out of the way, and blaming nature because of lack of growth and things like that, that is just playing into, it's divisive, it's dividing us, and it's playing into the hands of others. So we know we can build homes and restore nature. We can have our environmental standards. So we want the government to not be nature blind, be bolder on nature. And this new caucus, together with Labour backbenchers and other backbenchers across all parties, will be pushing for that, rejecting the binary choice. So what have we been able to do by working together so far? It seems like it's all bleak, but actually there's quite a lot has happened. Because the government has said to us, well, actually, we've not got the monopoly on good ideas, and they have taken up, with a bit of pushing, a bit of urging, but we have. So what have we successfully campaigned for? Community energy, front and centre of the GB Energy Act, which it wasn't. Ros Savage secured the first ever by government climate and nature statement, which will now be annual. So government will now be doing the climate and nature annual statement. So that is really important too. Gideon Mamus won improvements for nature in the earlier stages of the planning and infrastructure bill, and the Sunshine Bill. So Max Wilkinson's Sunshine Bill, the government agreed, yes, solar panels on every single new home. So again, really, really important achievements when we work together. And going forwards, we will together, cross-party, support what the Lords have just achieved. And that is in terms of voting for amendments 130 and 94 on chalk streams in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. And we will be working together with you and all of your support to make sure in the House of Commons we bring that through. We will strengthen voices. We will resist attempts to weaken the environmental voice, weaken the ability to go to judicial reviews, who are trying to sort of stop the cap on environmental costs. And obviously, we want to remain part of the Our House Convention. And we know the power of the local. So localism is a key part of the DNA of Lib Dems. So we will push in the devolution bill for statutory climate and nature duties for the new local authorities. We want a high ambition future home standard, finally! We want the creation of a new energy security bank, environmental plan that works in tandem with the carbon budget growth and delivery plan and with the adaptation plan, all working together to reverse nature's decline. And ahead of COP30, right now, we'll be working together. No more cuts to international aid. We'll be working together. The government will contribute to the Tropical Forest Forever Fund for Schedule 17 of the Environment Act finally to be implemented here in the UK to stop tropical deforestation caused by our own consumption patterns, and to harmonise with the UUDR, the EU's form of that, for transformation of global food systems agreement, and obviously for ratcheting up ambition. Learning from 15 years that I had the privilege out in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, from peoples from the South, who have always known that climate, nature, and environment are inextricable. They're part of the same thing, and in fact, they are part of our future. We've got a vested interest. We'll work together with you. We will be working together on environmental consensus as much as possible in Parliament. Thank you.